Hey guys, hope you had a good weekend. Today's lesson will probably be relatively short. I'm going to introduce a new concept in Shurley grammar. We're going to be looking at chapter 9, lesson 1. If you want to go ahead and be flipping there, if you want to look at it later after you've watched the video, that's fine too. You don't necessarily have to follow along with anything I'm doing right now. We're not going to do any grammar exercises with it today. I'm going to let it kind of sink in for a day or so. You may want to rewatch the video. We'll start doing exercises using these concepts tomorrow. Today's assignment's already been posted. It's Unit 9, completing the sentence from our vocab. Should work just like synonyms and antonyms. You go through and you type in your answers. I've set it up to, where it'll take capital letters or not, ed, ing on the end, whatever. If you have any issues, like I said before, just tell me. I'll correct the score for this first unit. Maybe for the next one, I'll do the same thing. But start being more careful of your spelling, because in a couple units I may just say, hey, if it's wrong, it's wrong. Make sure you spell them correctly. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today is indirect objects. We talked about direct objects in chapter 8, which you guys had a test on before spring break. Most of you did really well with that. I was pretty impressed. So it seems to have stuck pretty well. If you struggled with that, that might be something you want to go back and review, because if you don't get direct objects, you probably won't understand indirect objects very well. So what an indirect object is, whereas a direct object directly receives the action of a verb, the indirect object is something that is receiving what that action is done to. So if I say I baked a cake, okay, bake is the verb in that sentence, cake is obviously the direct object. If I said I baked my mom a cake, I'm not baking my mom, I'm baking the cake, but my mom is getting the cake that I baked. She is the indirect object, okay? The baking's being done for her, but not to her, if that makes sense. And this is going to introduce a new pattern of sentence for us. So we had pattern 2 sentences, which was where you had a subject noun, a verb or verb transitive, and then your direct object. Here we're going to have a subject noun, a verb transitive, an indirect object, and then a direct object. That's pattern 3. So indirect objects will always come between the verb and the direct object. So it's always before the direct object. We label these in Shurley as IO, by the way. So it's SN, V-T, IO, DO. These are always going to come before the direct object, and if you don't have a direct object in the sentence, you will not have an indirect object. Okay, so there has to be a direct object. Indirect object comes before it. I can think of a few really weird sentences where that might not be the case, but you're not going to see them in 6th grade English, maybe ever. So with that said, I'm going to give you a few examples. The examples come from the book, so this I hope will make it a little bit more clear how these things work. So the first one is grandmother made me a cake. It's a lot like my first example of baking my mom a cake. So grandmother is obviously our subject noun. Made is the verb. What did she make? Cake. So that's the direct object. Now who is it made for? Me. Then I'm the indirect object, because I'm not what's being made. That's the cake. Okay, so that's the direct object. That's what the action is being done to. But if you go back and you say, well, who is that cake being made for? Or for whom is that cake being made? Me. Indirect object. Next one is basically the same sentence, but it's just a little more complicated, a little wordier. Yesterday, our devoted grandmother carefully made Curtis and me a chocolate birthday cake. Okay, so yesterday is just an adverb telling us when the cake was made. So our subject noun, again, is the same thing as grandmother. Our devoted and all that's just descriptive, it's just adjectives. One's a PPA, obviously. Carefully made, so carefully is just an adverb describing that verb made. So made is our verb, that's what we're looking for. Again, just like with direct objects, you find the verb first in these sentences if you want to find out what your objects are. So made what? Made cake. Cake's our direct object. Doesn't matter that it's a chocolate birthday cake. I'm not asking you to label the whole sentence right now. You know those are adjectives because they're describing a direct object, which is a noun. So then we say, well, who was that cake made for? That cake was made for whom? And it's Curtis and me. So this is a compound indirect object. You can have multiple. You could have, again, an infinitude of indirect objects. I could say the birthday cake was made for Curtis, Bob, and Susan, blah, 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 blah. Name every name in the English language and every other language on the planet, and me, and go on for an infinity, and all of those would be compound indirect objects. You can have as many as you want to list there. It's whoever that cake was made for. If we make a cake for the whole planet, we're going to have to list off 7+ billion names if we want to name everyone, and those would all be indirect objects, okay? Next, as a funny joke, Marcy and I gave Tracy an empty gift-wrapped box. Is obviously an interjection. We went over those. Most of you guys did great with those. As a funny joke, prepositional phrase starting off the sentence. Marcy and I gave Tracy an empty gift-wrapped box. This is the part of the sentence we're actually concerned with. So the subject nouns are obviously Marcy and I. That's a compound. What did they do? What's our verb? Gave. Okay, so gave is our verb. What's being given? Box. Doesn't matter that it's empty and gift-wrapped. Again, those are obviously adjectives. So who is this box being given to? The box is being given to whom? Tracy, because it says Marcy and I gave Tracy an empty gift wrapped box. The distinction here is that you are not giving Tracy. Okay, you're not taking Tracy and giving her to someone. That would be a weird sentence. You're giving the box, the direct object, the box, to Tracy, who is then the indirect object. She receives the action, but the action is not done to her. And that's the difference between a direct object and an indirect object. The direct object is what the action is being done to. Like I kick the ball. Okay, the ball is the direct object. If I throw the ball is the indirect object. If I throw Jack the ball, I know one of you is named Jack, so you're welcome. I accidentally used your name. But if I throw Jack the ball, I'm not throwing Jack. Probably could. He's not a very big guy. But if I throw Jack the ball, he's the indirect object. He's getting the ball thrown to him. Okay, so the ball is thrown to whom? To Jack. The ball itself is the direct object. Again, if I don't have a direct object, I can't have an indirect object. Okay, I can't make a sentence that says, if I was going to say I baked my mom a cake, I can't drop the direct object off because then end up with a really creepy sentence. It's like I baked my mom, and then she becomes the direct object, and that sentence gets really scary. You don't want that. So again, if there's no direct object, there's no indirect object. Indirect object is always going to come before the direct object for you guys. If you have any questions on indirect objects, pattern 3 sentences, or anything like that, let me know today. Be thinking about it. Look over those example sentences in your book. You might want to try to label some of those for practice. I'm going to do a little exercise for these tomorrow. It won't be anything very lengthy because we're also going to start Unit 10 of vocab. Like I said, we're going to move really quickly with vocab going forward. Probably do 1 unit per week. And Unit 9's completing the sentence is up online right now for you to do. Make sure you get that done by midnight tonight. Make sure you spell everything correctly. And any other questions, anything like that, let me know. I'll try to answer them as quickly as I can. Generally, you want to send me a private message or an email with questions. If you post it on the main board, sometimes I don't get an alert that tells me that you posted it. So if I don't go through and look at that front page on Google Classroom, I don't see that you've posted that. Even if I go into the assignments, even if I'm looking at the messages people have sent me, I don't get alerts for those main board posts for some reason. So try to send it to me in a private message or an email if you have a question for me specifically. If it's something your classmates can answer, yeah, go ahead and post it on the main page. But sometimes I don't see those, and I don't know how to go in and change that in the settings. I don't know if I can. I'll look and see, but again, not sure. We're going to do lessons 9.1, 9.2, and 9.3 out of Chapter 9. Shurley will do all those this week. We may have a little quiz type thing on them early next week to see kind of how we're getting along with those new ideas. Because quotation marks are in this chapter and those can be kind of tricky, and I want to make sure we're holding on to that information. I don't think we'll struggle too much with indirect objects. Like I said, direct objects was pretty easy. And then next week we'll probably start doing a little bit of poetry out of our Pearl books. Like I said, I'm going to do vocab every week, but I'm probably going to alternate Shurley literature for the most part going forward. So just make sure you've got both of those books. Make sure you're ready to switch back and forth. But let me know if you have any questions, if we move too quickly over anything. Like if when I was talking about direct objects, you're like, I don't have a clue, and you go through the lesson and you still don't have a clue, just let me know. I'll try to put it in a way that's a little bit easier to understand. I can always do another video reviewing it. I can give you one-on-one instruction, whatever you need. Just make sure you let me know. Do completing the sentence before midnight. See you guys.